Good afternoon. Thanks for sticking with us today. I'm David Held. I'm product marketing lead for the sales applications at Microsoft. I'm going to be on stage here today. I'm proud to also have on stage with me Kishan and Carlos from our engineering teams. And we're going to spend a little bit of time just having me up here for a few minutes talking about kind of a market overview and some trends that we at Microsoft see and have a perspective on. And then we're going to really jump into the product itself and go deep on that, walk through some demos, and then I'll close it out on, okay, how do you take that and empower that modern seller at your organization with dynamics. Sorry about that. So about 5 years ago, Forrester came out with this Age of the Customer. And back then it was a theory. I think we can all agree today that this is indeed fact, that the customer does have a lot more power, buying power, than they have in the past. And a lot of that is because of information and access to information. And a lot of organizations, feel that this move to self-service is the way it's going. In fact, Forrester even had a report that said the death of the B2B salesman. It was a little bit of a clickbait headline, but the intent, I think, and the direction was important. But the reality is that today's buyers, just like every one of you in this room, truly do want a flawless self-service execution for many of your activities. However, you also want that high touch, real high value interaction with a seller or with a rep from an organization you're doing business with on high value topics. Maybe it's a complex product, or it could be a very low product that you just don't have the education and knowledge with. You need to have both, and I think it's very, very critical. The challenge has been, we as sales organizations, have been really focused on becoming more productive over the past 10 to 20 years. And CRM has been a huge component of that. What used to be a very personal one-to-one relationship where the seller and the buyer knew each other's names, they went golfing, they knew the family, they knew the birthdays, has over the years, through things like telesales and role specialization like inside sales, to automation of both marketing and sales productivity, as well as this e-commerce that I mentioned, has really driven us to be much more transactional. And we've lost some of that high touch, high value. And because of that, buyers are saying sellers no longer understand me, they no longer understand my business, and therefore I'm going to do the work and help myself. We're just completing some first-party research that actually shows that whole buyers are 70% of the way through the buying process. It's a bit of a misnomer, because most buyers would welcome interaction with the seller if they could get value, even early in the sales process. The difference is they're going to continue to do some work on their own, and they're going to kind of bounce back and forth. However, we, in a lot of ways, have been focused on productivity and kind of haven't allowed the channels for that to happen. Forrester agrees as well. They just released this new Wave report in July. And kind of what they said is yesterday's Salesforce automation tool was about sales management. It was about pipeline. It was about forecasting. It was about dashboards and reports, but it was not about seller empowerment. And if we're going to meet the needs of today's buyer, we have to think differently about sales technology, and we must focus on that seller empowerment. This is a great point made by the head of GE Digital Thread. It's a LinkedIn blog post. It talks about how data is the new oil for marketing and sales. And I think this is the key here that's missing from moving it from sales management to seller empowerment. Because if you look at data in kind of context, the majority of it is in silos. In this case, as an example, you have CRM data. So you have transactional data, things like back-end ERP data. You have productivity data that's sitting in your email or your calendar. You have conversations and connections that are having out on social channels like LinkedIn. And as a seller, you're given these tools when you join your company. You're given an email account, you're given a CRM system, and you're probably already using LinkedIn. The difference is you are now working and engaging with your customers in each of these independently. And the data is fractionally spread across all of these. And you do not have the ability to fully understand and see that buyer view, let alone if that buyer now is part of a buying group, which we know they are, and if that account is something that is doing business with you. So you have things like customer service and order history, et cetera. So when you talk about data as the new oil, oil is only good if you get it out of the ground, into the pipeline for processing, into your car so you can do something with it. And we at Microsoft have been able to do that. And we're bringing that data together, that relationship data, and putting it in the context of the seller. So now we're creating an experience for the seller that brings all of this data together in the context of an individual, a contact, an account, an opportunity, and being able to bring insight. And it's not just data, it's being able to, like I say, truly bring insight on what you should do next. We're going to advise you if somebody has left a position at a company. We're going to be able to recommend a piece of content that is unique to the product that's associated to that opportunity. We're going to be able to look at a meeting invite that's forwarded to somebody else in the organization and say, hey, should we be adding this individual to the buying opportunity group, just based on that forward? So again, being able to empower the data that's across the organization, put it in the context of the seller with whoever they're engaged with, and then make it impactful so they can do something with it. This is what we're calling kind of the era of relationship selling. It's no longer about just purely kind of that relational, personal one-to-one touch, nor is it about transactional. It's being able to take the best of both and allow organizations to scale the relationship aspects across the organization. So how do we do that? I'm not going to go deep into this slide because Kishan and Carlos are going to go deep in the product. But I like to pull up this slide because on the right side of it, you have sales productivity, you have sales performance. This is traditionally what sales CRM has been about. It's been about a sales process that a buyer or a seller goes through the exact same process. It's been about entering data so that you can look at reports and dashboards and potentially do some coaching if you're mature enough in a sales organization. We obviously have really intelligent business process and guided sales processes, Power BI, we have learning paths, we have all things that make and light these things up. But really what separates this and turns it into seller empowerment is the ability to take that actual insight across the organization and deliver it to the seller so they can create relationships and drive true, authentic engagement. So I'm going to leave it there, let them come up and do the products at this point. Kishan, if you want to come up. Yep.
Can they turn the mic on? All right, beautiful. Again, thank you guys for staying at like 4:30 or so in the evening, 4 in the evening. That's always a good thing. So what we wanted to do is, instead of essentially going into each of these different areas, I kind of wanted to take a step back and say, look, what are the things that when we look at the different deals that we looked at or the customers who have implemented, what really makes us win? So I wanted to focus on those aspects of the product and do a lot of it as essentially live demos, so you get a sense of what we're trying to do. So as a quick introduction, I look after the Salesforce automation and the marketing automation product line. And Carlos is going to be here, looks after some of our business process areas, so he'll just come in a second. So as I looked at kind of the growth that we've had over the last kind of 2-3 years, where we've been growing at like top double digit, when I kind of looked back and said, look, what are the things that are really making us win? I'd say productivity is still kind of our bread and butter. That's exactly what we sell. We essentially say, hey, you know what, we can save your sales guy an hour a day. That leads to kind of higher revenue, et cetera. So that's something which is core. The second thing increasingly that we're seeing, particularly maybe you can take it in your businesses, is business process. The idea to standardize business process, the idea to have best practice business process, automated, orchestrated. And that's where we put in a lot of depth in the product, and you'll actually see that in action where you see a live demo of how we orchestrate a business process, how we create it. The third one is social, but we'll come back to LinkedIn in a much bigger way, but social in general, to enable social selling, to enable kind of getting data from third parties, augmenting the data, and having more kind of data. I think we had the quote from Kate, who I've interacted with many times, about data being the new oil, and I think a lot of people do care about that, firmographic data, contact data, et cetera. Then LinkedIn increasingly, since we have a couple of the LinkedIn folks here who've been working very closely with us, but essentially the idea of using the network to do much better relationship selling is something critical. Mobile and mobile offline, especially as you go into the offline piece, particularly as you go into Europe, as you go into Asia, as you go into businesses where you need to be kind of not connected, I think our ability to have mobility, in fact, mobility first, I think is something which is definitely helping us in deals. There are still things that we need to do on the mobile, but I think it's a big part of the reason why we win. Increasingly, we've started to see a lot more deals where gamification helps us kind of close the deal, because it really, the end users and the business owners sees it as something that they can use that to change and increase adoption. We'll speak of a couple of case studies where it's really helped out. And I don't mean to keep analytics as a last, but intelligence and analytics is, I'd say, the key driver in a lot of the recent deals. I'd say productivity, LinkedIn, and analytics being kind of the top. Process is one of the areas that we have. So maybe most of you have seen the sales productivity session, but I just wanted to quickly call out, when I say productivity, what exactly are we referring to? We're referring to how we've embedded Office across Dynamics 365 and how we've embedded Dynamics 365 in Office. So it starts with tracking mails. It starts with being able to do immersive voice calls. It has the ability to kind of have notes embedded in a much more richer way across the product. It is about doing updates or doing essentially collaboration on Yammer. And we built all of this as not just sales capabilities. These are essentially capabilities of the platform, but it really helps the seller all the way from the whole kind of day, in some sense, be very productive with Office 365 and Dynamics 365 coming in. And we'll actually speak about how LinkedIn starts tying into that as we go into the scenarios going forward. This is another interesting one. Not a lot of people speak about that, but I just wanted to call it out. Whenever I speak to sellers, one of the challenges with sellers is the ability to just create, get access to, and distribute content. And here we have a really compelling kind of offering if you look at it end to end, with everything that we have with Dynamics 365, Office 365, and LinkedIn. So if it comes to creating content, of course, if we have Office 365, but we can create kind of portal pages with Dynamics 365. You can create point drive documents to share with LinkedIn. When it comes to storing kind of content and retrieving content, whole bunch of different solutions that we have. Collaboration, of course, we have strong capabilities with Yammer and our Office groups and our teams. And discovery, we have both recommendations and the ability to kind of have more AI-driven recommendations. And this is where, if you start seeing the newer interfaces, we have more visual ways of showing document recommendations, and the last one being distribution. Our belief is, especially as David was pointing out earlier, the seller needs to engage more, needs to be a more consultative seller, needs to kind of get the right material to educate himself or herself or their clients. It becomes very important to kind of have the right content, and that's the reason why we've emphasized a lot on kind of the content aspect of sales. Process is another one which we've done significant investments in over the last kind of few releases. And this one, for all the clients that we have across the banks, across different industries which are very process-centric, where you need to do things in a specific manner, whether that's for regulation or whether that's for best practice, we've seen significant benefit from it in the selling process. So take Metro Bank, which we'll speak about later. We had Citibank, which is like huge on the ability to kind of manage a best practice sales process for each of them. So here we've done a bunch of different things in terms of having a visual designer, in terms of doing automation in how to kind of extend the process. We'll show a lot of this in live demo, because I think it's very important from your perspective as you kind of take it back to your businesses or your clients, that this is a capability that's really embedded in the product. Feel free to share it with your business teams, have them actually help build some of these processes. I found it very effective where this is not just an IT activity where business actually gets in and starts designing some of these processes. It tends to help quite a bit in terms of adoption of the tool itself. The ability to have kind of task-based experiences where you don't have just a kind of an entity-centric view, but have a more task-centric view so that you can have the best practices tasks to go and execute. And the last one is all of our process is essentially written and stored as an entity in Dynamics 365 and CRM. So that means you can start to do really cool analysis. You can start to understand where exactly am I spending my time on? How many things are in which stage is being my bottleneck, where am I spending more time, where am I spending less time? And we also have a content pack on Power BI. So that means that when you actually go turn on Dynamics 365, you can actually get the process analyzer, the process content pack, and you have an out-of-the-box dashboards and reports. How many of you guys, let me kind of try to get your breath out of sleep. How many of you know that we have business process and a process content pack? Okay, 2 of you. How many of you guys implement process in Dynamics 365? So yeah, a lot more. So you can see that's the reason why I kind of wanted to bring it out, because we've seen this gets adopted quite a lot, but not a lot of people know about the analytics, so something for you to take away. So with that, Carlos, why don't you actually come and show some of the key capabilities that we have here. Turn in the mic, please.
All right, so I'm going to be showing a couple of different capabilities on business process flows. As Kishan mentioned, we've made a bunch of investments, both on the previous release and also on this new release, to increase the way that you can connect business process to other constructs within CRM, and also visualize those processes. So I'm going to go over a sales process and try to show some of those capabilities. Let me just double check that I'm on the right process here. All right, so what you're seeing is the new unified interface. So you might have seen this interface from the other demos during Ignite. And I wanted to use this one rather than web client because this is the one we already know. This is the new one. And yeah, that's a good question. Have people seen the new unified interface? Right, yeah, some people have seen the new unified interface. Basically, let me take a step back then. We've made some investments in creating this new interface, which is going to be enabled across form factors, including on desktop. And it's a much more clear design, much more modern, and have some very interesting capabilities for you to find the right entities that you want to work with, for you to kind of navigate the information and find what you want to know. So as I run through the business process, we're going to see some of those capabilities. So one of the things that changed for business process flow on the unified interface is now the business process they show as these milestones. We understand that this made a little bit more sense than necessarily the chevrons. And I think this is kind of new and modern, and people are going to like it a little bit more. And one of the cool things is that if I want to see what's inside of this stage, what I can do is just click here on the first stage, and it's going to give me this floating list of steps. So if I'm a new person on the organization, I arrive at this form, and there's like a bunch of fields. It's a very comprehensive form. There's a lot of information. I don't even know where to start. I can either train everyone to know which fields that they have to fill and find information on this very complex form, or I can train everyone to just say, hey, follow the business process. If you're on the first stage, that's your first milestone, just go ahead and click here, and you're going to get at least the stage that you have to complete. This is me guiding my users through a standardized business process so that they can be successful. Everyone's following kind of the same best practices. I'm just going to go ahead and click next stage here. Then one of the cool things is that if you remember the web client implementation, the business process is always available on top of the entity. We also have a similar treatment. We can take this docked stage and this floating stage and dock it to the side. So if I want to work with information on the form together with my business process, it's now here on the side. And it's now laid out from top to bottom instead of left to right. And this makes a much better use of space. Plus, it's much more intuitive, right? Because it looks like almost like a shopping list. I get my milk, I get my cereal, I get my honey, and then boom, I'm ready to go on to the next stage and advance. All right, so on the second stage here, I'm developing this lead, and I understand that they are going to need a discount. So let me go ahead and say that I'm going to give 15% discount. And then you can notice that there's a small light bulb here. I don't know if everyone can see, but this is what we call a business recommendation. So I wrote some rules, and when I say I wrote some rules, I didn't write one single line of code. The tools that we have to do this, they are completely visual, they are completely drag and drop, And they enable, again, the business analysts who have deep knowledge about the business rules and the realities of this organization to step in and make sure that they are correctly implemented without having to depend so much on IT. So if I click on this light bulb here, it's going to say, hey, the discount that you're giving is kind of outside of the normal range, right? So I'm giving discount higher than 20%. It might compromise our revenues and reduce our future bargaining power. We're usually successful closing deals with discounts around 5%. Do you want to reconsider that? And if I click apply, it's going to run another rule that applies the value for me. So very intuitive, very guided. But turns out that this, I happen to know I'm a stubborn person, and I was empowered by my organization to make decisions as well. And I happen to know that this customer is going to need a huge discount. And I don't know if you noticed that, but as soon as I typed 25%, a new stage got dropped here in the business process. And that's one of the powerful things about business processing Dynamics 365, which is the fact that you can have branches, and they get automatically recalculated to reflect the conditions around this process. So this is a good point for me to take a break and open the designer so that you can see visually how this is represented. So I'm going to go here on my web client, and I'm going to click Edit Process. And this is the new web designer that we released on the previous version of CRM. So you can see this is a new layout. Anyone who is familiar with a tool like Microsoft Visio is going to be familiar with this kind of thing as well. And this is my condition represented. So you can see that I have the same stages that I had on the list of milestones I have here in the business process as well. And this is completely drag and drop and kind of a visual editor. I can make this process as complicated as I want. I can just drag a new stage here, drag a new branch. And I have this kind of palette of controls that I can just reuse and put on my business process to make it more complex or more comprehensive, however I need. So this is the branch that we talked about. It's saying that if the discount is higher than 20%, just go ahead and add a new stage here. A couple of different things. We have this mini map, so it's easy to navigate, zoom in, zoom out, and I can also take a snapshot. This enables collaboration. Right, so back into my process. I was here on this guy, and then I'm going to go ahead and click Next Stage. Now, one of the cool things that I did to this business process, and let me go ahead and open back the designer so you can see, is that I dropped one new component that was here on my component list, which is this workflow. So this workflow is running an automation for me. And this is where I'm introducing automation, which is very powerful for business processes because they don't have to be completely manually driven. And when I put this workflow here, it's running a workflow that I created for Dynamics. And what it's doing is it's creating a task for my manager for them to go and approve this discount or not. So as soon as I entered this stage, it fired that workflow. And if I jump here to my task list, it got created, right? So my manager just goes here. They know what this task is all about. It's saying, hey, opportunities are currently discounted 25%. Go there and review. They can open the opportunity and say that they approved it or not. Another thing, the cool thing that I can do is that if I'm the salesperson and I'm seeing that my manager is not responding in time, I can also nag them a little bit. And what I did for this business process is that I put this button here. So this is also a new piece of functionality. It's called Action Steps. So really, usually on business process, you have the data steps that you just fill out. And now we have a button, which is on-demand call for a workflow. What this button is doing is something also very similar. It's creating an email for my managers and saying, hey, you need to go do this ASAP because this is a very important customer. So I'm just going to go ahead and click and execute here. It's going to take a second. All right, so it's not loading on a unified interface for some reason. Let me go ahead and cheat a little bit because I'm going to go back to web client. It's the same execution, by the way. So I'm going to go ahead and click execute. Then I'm going to say, please go see this opportunity for ASAP. It gets executed. Then hopefully, if I refresh my list of tasks, you can see that I have my mail creator here, and it has the exact same text that I inputted. So this was a special type of workflow that had an input parameter that I could fill out to send this email. All right, what else is going to happen here? Let's see. I'm going to go ahead, say that I got the approval. I'm going to go ahead and switch to propose. So I also did one piece of automation, which I'm not sure whether it's going to work or not, because it takes a couple of minutes to fire. But I think the scenario is very cool. One of the things that I did is I connected Flow, so Microsoft Flow, part of the bigger Power Apps discussion, Dynamics 365 discussion, is listening to events and is going to do something with my process. So the automation that I did is, we are on the second to last stage of the process. If the customer comes in with the signed contract and they upload that to a folder that I prepared specially for them, Flow is going to get triggered and is going to automatically finish my process, going to automatically advance my process to the next stage. So this is when I start interacting with other systems, which is a super powerful scenario. So if I go here on my my OneDrive, I'm going to add a file. This was this one. So it gets uploaded, gets created, and it should take a couple of minutes for Flow to fire this process. But again, it's two-step. One is the trigger on OneDrive, and the other is updating the record. While it's doing that, a couple of other things that I can show you is, so one of the things that Kishan mentioned was that business processes are now an entity on the system. So one of the things that you can do is see all the business processes on a grid together with a chart. Again, just like any other data entity. So a very powerful visualization. And Unified Interface also has a very cool kind of dashboard, which is usually used more for customer service, but also kind of resonates well with this scenario, which is the stream dashboard. So here I'm seeing a stream of different events, different active instances of process. Then I can also see a chart of a distribution of where the processes are according to their stages. And I have these tiles which summarize how many processes I have that are active versus inactive. And this kind of gives me a very good overview if I'm a business analyst of what the state of my organization is. I'll just see if this workflow ran. I'm not sure that it did. Let's click here. No, it didn't yet. But what it's going to do is it's going to detect that the file got uploaded, and it's going to advance the process to the next stage. Back to you.
While we're speaking about relationship sales, the reason why I thought showing the business process in such detail is important is if you have larger organizations where you're bringing in a lot of new folks, there's a heavy amount of churn, it's very important to have these kind of guidance, best practice business processes, very clearly articulating what your stages are, what you need to do in each stage. And that's where you can see, so in summary, what you've seen is designing a best practice business process, the ability to have multiple business processes running at the same time. You have the ability to create rules and recommendations which you can essentially pop out to the user in place while they're actually acting on something. And then the ability to report across it all. So you actually know what's working well and what's not working well. So what I thought is that I'll actually show you not just our demo, but a customer example. And this is a good industry because it's an industry in which business process standardization is super important. But we have several examples like this, but I thought I'll just play a video so that you can understand how like a customer uses the business process in a fairly embedded way in their customer kind of sales process. It's a bank, Metro Bank, you perhaps have seen their case studies, but I thought that I'll just play to kind of see how they use it.
At Metro Bank, we're harnessing the latest technology to empower our colleagues and provide excellent customer experiences. Let's show you what we're doing.
Good afternoon, welcome to Metro Bank, how can I help?
So, Kate, I hear you're interested in expanding your business. I'd love to hear what got you started initially and what your plans are.
Well, I've been running the business from home and it's been growing really quickly and I need better premises. I think it's time for a new bank.
Information about our procedures is fast and easy to find, enabling our colleagues to provide helpful answers in seconds. We use modern communication tools to locate the next available specialist there and then, so our customers aren't kept waiting, nor do they have to make an appointment another day. Our systems are fast and easy to use, so staff can initiate internal processes while meeting the customers.
Well, thank you, Kate. That's really useful. I'd like to introduce you to someone from our asset finance team. I really think they could help you.
We use automated processes to reduce administration and ensure that every inquiry is dealt with promptly and professionally. And with the latest mobile devices, the service continues wherever our colleagues are working.
Kate's Cakes, how can I help?
Hi Kate, it's Jonathan from Metro Bank Asset Finance. Good news, the finance has been agreed for your new equipment.
Thank you. That's amazing. I can't wait to get up and running in my new shop.
Microsoft is at the core of everything we do. We use Dynamics CRM at the heart of our business, managing our customer information and automating our processes. SharePoint stores all of our documentation, and Skype for Business allows us to communicate in the fastest and most convenient ways. With Microsoft, we're changing the way banking works.
Perhaps the interesting thing to note is it's actually the CEO who's talking about this, not just somebody who's heading IT or heading sales. So it's kind of a, in some sense, it's a CEO level concern, it's a CEO level discussion when it comes to like really driving the top line. How many of you know that we have a solution where all of the Dynamics 365 solution customers have access to something called Versium? It's essentially available as a part of the product. So that's like really one hand. But that was one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up. One of the things that we realized, especially in selling and even other scenarios, marketing and selling scenarios, is you need to have a lot of rich data about the people that you're essentially trying to sell to, about the companies that you're selling to. So we've done a couple of partnerships. I'll actually speak about both of them, and then we'll speak about LinkedIn more of a way to kind of help us sell. But Versium essentially is it's essentially a data warehouse of really good signals, both about a consumer and about the business. So I think that's a very important thing. What you see there is it has information about your business profile. So essentially which industry, the firmographics, and also your consumer profile. What's your interest? Are you like, an environmentally friendly person? Are you a technologist, etc.? So this kind of combination of both of this data helps you really understand kind of the right type of leads that you can go and generate, so that you can actually use that to feed kind of your sales process or marketing automation processes. So I was speaking to a construction company. So essentially what they do is they essentially do shingles on the roofs, and their business model is that they need to find contractors so these guys can actually go place these shingles on the roof. And for them, finding new leads as they kind of expanded their geography was super critical. So if they expanded, like let's say to Canada or expanded internationally, they needed to find new leads because they just did not know in that market. And they used tools like this based on the right criteria, based on the type of leads that worked for them in the past. Essentially, Versium ran predictive models to help give leads like this. And we have several use cases where essentially people are tapping into this as a data source of leads. In several industries, you actually spend a lot of money buying these leads as a rented list. Now you have the ability to actually get these leads, and we're available internationally with this solution across several markets. And let me play a quick video of how it actually looks like in real life. How can you actually do this predictive modeling? But it's a key offering that we have, and I'll actually speak about the other partner right after this. That's supposed to play. Okay, that's a technical glitch. But in short, before I jumped out of that, I think essentially what that video tries to capture, which we perhaps we should have had the video proper, but what it tries to capture is the fact that I can create a predictive model, and a predictive model based on things which have worked for me in the past and things which have not worked for me in the past. So leads which have converted into opportunities and leads which I never managed to close. And using this data that's already in your CRM system, it goes ahead and closes out, creates new leads based on a predictive model that you can then use for selling and for marketing automation. So that's the core of the key capabilities that's available. Let me actually see if I can get out of this and try to play it, because it was working just a second ago. Any idea why there's no sound on this one? All right, we'll move on that one. The other partnership that we've done is with InsideView, which is a partnership we've had for a little bit of time as well. And the reason I wanted to mention both is Versium has done a lot of capabilities around predictive modeling, but InsideView has a lot of depth in terms of being able to augment your data. So if you have information about a contact, if you have information about an account, being able to augment that data with data from their warehouse, as well as the ability to kind of get news, the ability to get insights, and in a very embedded way. So this is something that I've seen sellers use in a very significant way to be able to then use this to kind of get a better view of the context that they're going after, better view of the stakeholders in that account, and better view of essentially the account itself. So both of these are available out of the box with the Dynamics 365 product. So we've seen increasing traction of people turning it on, but that's something that's just available for you to use. The third area where, in some sense, we're using social and the content from social is using our social engagement tool itself. So this is, again, something that's available as part of the Dynamics 365 plan. And as you look at the process, increasingly as sellers need to be kind of more consultative, they need to be seen by their prospects as being authoritative and actually knowing what they're talking about. It's not about the golf, it's not about the dinners, it's about essentially saying, hey, I actually know what I'm talking about when I'm actually coming and selling stuff to you. And one of the ways of doing that is to in some sense, build a social brand. And social selling helps find the right type of content for you to share. I mean, LinkedIn is a great source. LinkedIn has some really high-level content and great content. And we actually have integrated this with the ability to kind of publish some of the content that's discovered here onto LinkedIn, onto your LinkedIn persona, so that you can essentially project good content onto your professional persona. It's also built with machine learning in mind. So that means that if you actually say that you don't like this recommendation, these recommendations don't make sense, it actually learns from that and starts recommending the right things for you. And this is something that we've enabled embedded in the mobile app, or it can be available in the browser, but a very easy way for you to kind of detect and find content. So let me quickly jump and do a demo of that so that you can actually see this in action. Great. I seem to have lost my window of that, or all right. Well, let's do this. While we're going through the next demo, we'll actually set this up and show this demo very quickly to you. Along with the LinkedIn, well, we'll just bring that up. So the next set of things where we kind of saw the two things, which is essentially the external data, the ability to kind of do social content. We'll actually show that demo in just a second. But LinkedIn is another area where we've done a lot of integrations around LinkedIn. So if you kind of looked at kind of the broad picture, and we have a few of the LinkedIn folks here as well, so who can chime in, who are really the experts on the LinkedIn side. From an end-to-end process perspective, we've done the ability to generate demand from LinkedIn, just like what you saw. Versium is a place where you can essentially get qualified leads. Similar to that, LinkedIn is actually perhaps one of the best places to get leads who are qualified and interested. So we've provided the ability to kind of run sponsored content ads and bring leads into the system. We'll actually show this live in a demo. And once you kind of have these leads in the system, we've used Sales Navigator in a very immersive way to be able to essentially then understand who are the right people in that organization, get the right connections, get the right recommendations, and we have the right experts here who can actually speak about that. Point Drive is something that I've seen resonate quite a bit with the sales users. I spoke about sales content earlier, but in addition to having a lot of good content, being able to distribute that in a very easy, personalized way and track how effective it is, that is super crucial. And that's where Point Drive really, really shines through. Very highly used. I've seen our sellers just take onto it and use it in every single deal context, and I must say it really shines. And the last one is the offer that we've been bringing to the market and selling. So in case you don't know about it, it's the relationship sales offer is essentially a combination of our Sales Navigator and Dynamics 365 for sales, and it's clearly a better deal than buying each of them separately. So with that, there are a few things that we've done around this. In terms of the demand generation, here the key, and we'll show this a little bit in demo, but I just wanted to set it up in context. This is essentially an add-on that's available today. You can, available in preview today, so you can actually go and get this in your organization. We have several partners and customers running on it. And the key idea is if you have your company pages, there are about 9 million of these company pages where you can add content on. You can essentially create your organic content, use an ad to go sponsor that content, and target specific people based on different attributes, whether that's their, this is all LinkedIn marketing, LinkedIn campaign product. That's what you're seeing right now. So you can essentially target people based on different attributes, geography, industry, size of the company, seniority, etc. And that lets you really specifically target the right audience where you want to get your message across or amplify your message in some sense. And then the guys actually, the audience sees this on their LinkedIn feed, so you can actually see this as an ad. And once you kind of say yes, it actually you can ask to kind of default the information for that lead based on your LinkedIn profile. So in some sense, you're essentially getting some really high quality information with the customers okay for it, so which is great. So this is one way of kind of getting the leads into the system that's automatically integrated back. And then you have the whole integration with Sales Navigator end-to-end to truly kind of help the seller drive. And this is, once it's available in Dynamics 365, you can of course also use it for your marketing automation. You would most likely use it for your marketing automation so that you can drive kind of lead nurturing processes. And as we bring a marketing automation tool to the market, you can actually start to see more of a demand generation, marketing automation, and then a sales execution all on one platform. You'll start to see that happen more. So this one I actually have a slide, but I think it's much better in a live demo. But I think in summary, what we've announced to the market is really around the ability to have the three key things, right? I think the Sales Navigator embedded with the refreshed widgets. Steven and his team have spent a lot of effort in kind of making that widgets be far more seamless within Dynamics 365, be more resizable, be more flow much better across different form factors. The second one is with the integration that we're doing between Dynamics 365 and LinkedIn, which I believe is in preview right now, which we're extending out to be generally available in a couple of months. That means that you can essentially start to synchronize kind of data from CRM into Sales Navigator. So when you're in Sales Navigator, you have some context from what you're doing in CRM and vice versa. And some of the activity data from Sales Navigator comes into CRM. And that kind of lets you put kind of a full picture of this. A few screenshots, but you know what, in the interest of kind of showing it in a demo, I'd actually much rather show it in the demo. A great example of somebody who uses both of these components, both the Sales Navigator and LinkedIn, is Infosys. I actually personally work very closely with their sales leadership. And I must say, this is a great example of how it works in their scenario. So like Infosys, like a typical services company, the bulk of their revenue is from a few large clients, right? That's where they drive a lot of the revenue. And each of those large clients, their account managers tend to have anywhere between 15 to 20 contacts that they have to sell to, because of the fact that just because I've gotten myself into one division doesn't mean that I've gotten into another division at GE. And the GE is not, I don't know if it's a client of them, I'm just giving an example. So they really needed to understand, how do I get into that specific division? How do I get my services kind of in the limelight in a specific project that's going on? So they very actively use LinkedIn. They very actively use they're a Dynamics 365 customer for a while for managing their sales process. And essentially what they saw, they ran a very structured pilot. They saw that it kind of created about $450 million of pipeline by relationship selling alone. And just to put it into perspective, their annual revenue is $10 billion. So that pipeline is a significant kind of part of their annual revenue. It's not a small number. And essentially, according to them, 30% higher win rates and the deal's closure being much better. So it's a very avid user of LinkedIn and Sales Navigator, and their head of sales, one of the key things that I see about him is the fact that he's extremely articulate, has a very strong presence on social media, something that's very crucial for a leader like that. So where are we going from here? So I think the key things, and in the interest of time, let me actually jump into get the demo as well. The key things that we're trying to do, working very closely, Carlos and Steven and team, is essentially to start to drive scenarios where we can have the sales navigator and the capability in a much more immersive way in Dynamics 365. So immersive in terms of, hey, based on the right context, based on the right stage, do I have the right data? Can I use some of the LinkedIn activity data to drive additional intelligence? Can I use kind of the connections capability? And can I have the right recommendations in there? And each of this being contextual based on which stage I am, because when I'm in a first stage versus a subsequent stage, I might have different things I care about. So just to give an example, this is an example of some stage dependent as well as contextual control. So if you actually look at this, you can see on the right, on the process kind of bar that Carlos was showing, you have some LinkedIn specific highlights that you can see there. You can see the LinkedIn relevant widget down below and the ability to do immersive in-mail. So these are not things that are there today, just to be clear. These are things that we're working on as we start bringing some of this out to the market. So a couple of things highlighted. The ability to have, one of the key requests that we get all the time is the ability to have kind of the face shots or the shots that you can see on your activity timeline. Big investment on our side in the UCI. And the ability to have kind of the photo there coming from LinkedIn, because that typically tends to be one of the most updated photos. It's perhaps the only photo I have where I have a suit and a tie. So it's actually good that if somebody sees that in the CRM system, that's a good thing. So that ability to kind of have that in your activity timeline is a big thing. Then relationship analytics. How many of you know about relationship analytics? Couple. So the ability to have relationship analytics, not just have Office and CRM information, but also start to have LinkedIn information across the board, whether that's in your activity view, whether in looking at all of your different interactions. And the last one is kind of having the point drive, which you'll see in a demo in a much bigger way, embedded with like relationship cards based on the point drive. So you can essentially start to get point drive actions driving specific follow-ups. So with that, let me quickly get us into a demo on relationship insights. And while you're doing that.
So just to be clear, what I'm going to be demoing are the capabilities that are available today and not necessarily the last 4 or 5 slides that Kishan talked about. But as Kishan mentioned, one of the key advantages of doing this very powerful integration between Dynamics 365 and LinkedIn is that your sales department is going to be able to receive warm leads through demand generation. We're going to see how that works. And the other thing is that the sales people are going to be working with contact to the right people that help move this deal forward, right? So let's to showcase all of this, I'm going to start with a marketing scenario through demand generation. This is going to become a lead on my system, and then I'm going to work that lead through my sales process. So LinkedIn has this product campaign manager. It allows me to set up campaigns on people's feeds. This is very powerful because if I'm posting on LinkedIn, I'm posting on the largest professional network with over 500 million employees, right? So it's a huge user base, and I can target a lot of people. But I also have very powerful query tools that you're going to see later to help me, laser focused on the target audience that I want to show this campaign to. And last but not least, I can deliver this content across different form factors. So today we live in a mobile world. People are on different devices, and they are consuming the content on different devices. So the campaign that I set up is going to be available across. So I'm going to start here on the Campaign Manager. And Campaign Manager has this nice dashboard where I can see the performance of my past campaigns. So this particular organization was running a campaign from August 29th to September 6th and capture a couple of clicks. But the best way to explain how the campaign works is to actually build a new campaign from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and click here on Create Campaign. And it's going to ask what kind of campaign I'm going to create. I'm going to say that I want to use the lead gen forms, which is a special kind of campaign. And then I'm going to select one of the contents that my marketing team prepared for me. So these are some images, some text that are going to be shown on this ad that people are going to see on the timeline. And this is a nice screen because it has a preview. So you saw on Kishan's slides, it had a couple of screenshots of what the ad looks like on people's feed. This is exactly what it's going how it's going to work. So one of the things that I can do is pick a call to action, and I'm going to explain how this works, and then pick a form, right? So I don't know, maybe generate more leads, something like that. So people are going to see this campaign, and they can just consume it and be done with it. But they can also go ahead and click on this call to action, which is register. So imagine that I am Contoso, or it could be Microsoft, and we're going to have an event coming up, right? So the call to action is click here to register for our event. We're going to talk about digital transformation, for example. And when they go ahead and click there, they are presented with this registration form. Now, we've seen that multiple times. A lot of people use this registration wall to capture information about their leads. Now, the problem here is that usually this registration form comes empty. So either one or two things happen. Either I say, you know what, I'm not really that interested, and I drop off. Or I'm going to say, look, they promised an ebook. I'm just going to say that I'm, I don't know, Bill Gates, and be done with it. Just going to put some information there, and I'll be one click away from downloading the ebook. Now, what's interesting about this implementation is that since people are consuming this from LinkedIn, the form is going to be automatically pre-populated with their information, so it gets a lot of accurate data that they can edit. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. The user goes ahead and click next, and they finally get the content that they were promised, either a way to register for the event or download the ebook, whatever else I wanted to have here. It's going to go ahead and click next, and these are some of the very powerful query tools that I have to target the specific audience. So maybe I'll say that I want this campaign to appear for, I don't know, the Orlando area. And then specific industry maybe, where's industry? Information, technology, and services, right? So this is me targeting this ad because it's not going to be relevant for the others. Why would I pay for impressions for people that will not be interested anyway? Then I click next, and then I'm ready to finalize the setup of my campaign. Then I'm going to just say whether the bid type is going to be cost per click or cost per impression, when the campaign should start, when the campaign should end. All right, so fast forward a little bit. This campaign is running on LinkedIn. People are interested. They are seeing the ad, and they are clicking on the registration form. They're submitting their information. There's an engine that runs on the background. Is going to synchronize all those form submissions with Dynamics, and it's going to generate leads on the system. So I have this nice dashboard here, and it's showing, one of the things that it's showing is all the leads that I have in the system by lead origin. So I can generate leads from trade shows or from employee referral, but you can see that this yellow area here is one of the biggest ones this organization has been running for some time. It's generating leads from LinkedIn sponsored content. If I double click on that, I actually have this other pie chart here. This is comparing the performance, how many leads each campaign that I put online generated. So this is very useful because I could do sort of an A/B testing. I could generate one campaign for one market, another campaign for another market, and kind of compare East Coast, West Coast, which one is performing better. Or I can also compare, the campaign from this calendar year with the campaign from last season and see if we are faring better than we used to. Now here I have the list of leads that got synchronized to Dynamics. So I'm just going to go ahead and double click on one of them. And this person, Bruce, happens to work for Metro Bank. And you can see that I get all the information that he submitted on that registration form. So very accurate information that I can work with. The other thing that you can see here on the right-hand side is, maybe zoom in a little bit, is all the form submissions that Bruce did. The idea here is that if Bruce interacted with one of our sponsored content, then we say, okay, so we capture a warm lead, he's interested, let's work on with Bruce. But if they submitted 10 different, they interacted with 10 different sponsored pieces of content, then I know that they are much more interested. I definitely have to work on that lead. They're really interacting with the content that our company is putting out. So let's fast forward a little bit. This is still a lead. The marketing process stops here. The sales process picks this up, brings it to the pipeline, and starts qualifying and working this lead. So I'm fast forwarding here. We know that this deal is going to be a relationship sales with Metro Bank. We captured a bunch of information about Bruce. It's all here on this, again, very comprehensive form. I have the business process to guide me. But what's interesting is that all this information is information that I have inside of Dynamics. If I scroll down a little bit, I have a window into all the insights and all the knowledge that LinkedIn has about Bruce relative to my personal profile. So this is actually my LinkedIn profile that is open right there. And I have a couple of different tabs here. They're providing me different interesting insights. The first one is icebreakers. It's looking a little empty here because I don't have a lot of things in common with Bruce, other than the fact that we have some shared connections, and we're also part of the same interest group inside of LinkedIn. But had we gone to the same school, it would appear there. Had we worked in the same company, it would appear there. And think about how powerful this is. If I reach out to Bruce for the first time, I have these icebreakers or conversation starters that I can mention and say, hey, Bruce, I noticed that you're interested in digital transformation. I'll be happy to go over the things that we have here at Microsoft or here at Contoso that might be a good fit for your company. By the way, happy to see some friendly faces. Good to see someone who went to whatever it was, the same school that I went to. And Bruce is going to look at that. He said he's going to confirm, yeah, really, I expressed interest in digital transformation. And yeah, by the way, we went to the same school. Let's talk to this guy, right? So it's a much more personal, much more interesting approach. The other tab that I have here is Get Introduced. So this is very powerful because it's going to look at all my connections, and it's going to suggest people that Bruce and I have in common that can provide an introduction. But even more interesting than that, I have a couple here which are first-degree connections. There are people who work at Microsoft. Even more interesting than that is LinkedIn Team Link. So what Team Link is doing is looking at all the connections that people on my organization have with Bruce, right? So these are all people who work at Microsoft. They are not necessarily a first-degree connection with me. Maybe they are second or third. But if I pick up my phone, they're connected to Bruce. If I pick up my phone and say, hey, I noticed that you're connected to Bruce. Can you provide an introduction? They'll be happy to, because we all want our Contoso company or Microsoft company to be successful. So with this, I can ask for an introduction. The last one is related leads. So these are people who are important within Metrobank and are sort of related to Bruce in some way. So this may be the buying committee around Bruce. These are going to be the decision makers, the people who might be working with Bruce to close this deal. So it's very important that I keep track of these people, that I know who they are. If I scroll down a little bit, I'm going to have a similar view, but into the company, Metrobank. So from right to left, one of the things that I have are the news. So things that are important that have been highlighted in the news gets highlighted here as well. And I actually went ahead and opened one of these articles. Again, this is all real data. This article was published about 3 days ago or so, a couple of days ago, and it was talking about all the different banks that they have in London and how they fare relative to their customer service performance. And I was telling that some of the big brands, they don't fare so well, and Metrobank is one of the ones that have the highest score. So now I know the context of Metrobank. Now I know what's important for them. What are their values? If I'm going to come up with a solution, if I'm going to sell digital transformation or whatever else, it's important that I bring those values into my deal so that they are going to relate much more with it. So super important to understand the context. The other is connections. So imagine that I didn't know Bruce at all, so I need someone to get me inside of Metrobank. Connections are going to provide me that way in. By the way, Bruce is listed here. And the last one is recommended leads. So again, people that are relevant might be decision makers and might be around the buying committee. But there's also an interesting scenario there, which is suppose that I close this deal successfully with Bruce. One of the things that I can do is go look at those related leads. And if Metrobank has multiple buying committees, maybe there's an opportunity for me to sell again to Metrobank, but to a different environment, different department. And think about it. This time, I'm going to have a reference from Bruce, and chances are that I'm going to be successful again. All right, so 2 other things that I want to show. I'm going to skip to Sales Navigator here. I don't want to spend too much time on Sales Navigator because there's a lot of functionality to cover, and they are not specific necessarily to Dynamics 365 integration. But 2 things to keep in mind is I have this timeline. These are people that I am sort of tracking as leads or accounts. These are not my personal connections, but I get this timeline of updates, this feed of updates, so that I can keep track of what is happening to those people in company. Now, how do I get those people in? I have the lead builder. So very similar to how I had those very comprehensive filters on Campaign Manager to filter down the 500 million different users on LinkedIn, I'm going to have those same capabilities here as well, so that I can find the right leads if I'm exploring a new industry, if I'm exploring a new market, or if I want to find specific people within a region, I'm going to be able to filter them down through this. So I save those results into my leads and accounts. And if I do, now one aspect of the Dynamics integration, you see that all these leads have been saved, and all of them, most of them, except for this last one, they have this in CRM badge. What does that mean? That means that Sales Navigator knows what's inside of my Dynamics organization, and it's telling me through that flag that, hey, I know you're working from Sales Navigator, but this person is already being tracking inside of your Dynamics organization. So there is a context there. Maybe you should go back and try to understand, maybe you sold something for them in the past. Maybe you solved an issue for them in the past. Maybe it was successful, maybe it was not. So understanding that past context might be important before you send the next message, before you try to sell to them again. And the last thing is about communication. So let me go ahead and pick this guy here. We synchronize what we call write back. We synchronize some special LinkedIn activities back to CRMs, things that are going to be very useful for when we're collaborating, because again, sales today is a collaborative process. So if I'm talking to this person and I send a message through LinkedIn, that conversation is going to be between me and Brian. No one else is going to see that. But maybe I exchange some important information about the deal and I want my sales team to know about. So one of the things that I can do is just go ahead and click here on copy, message to CRM. And if I go back here to my opportunity, scroll up a little bit, you're going to see all my my timeline, my list of activities. These two blue icons here represent a message that got synchronized from LinkedIn. Similarly, I may have reached out to Brian with a phone call, and maybe he said, look, we're almost ready to close. We just need a higher discount, 50% or whatnot. I just can go ahead and add a note here, quick note, and synchronize that note because it has important information that my sales team may want to know.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Carlos.
Sure.
So this was kind of the relationship sales and the LinkedIn integration demo. The other thing, let me just build this out quickly. This is one area there where we see a lot of differentiation that, especially in like deals outside of North America, increasingly I'm seeing kind of a lot of interest in this. The ability to have not just a mobile application. So we built the product as build once, deploy everywhere, but for it to be fully offline. So we use Azure as kind of the middleware to be enabling the full offline. So this is offline through configuration. So all of the configurations that you do in terms of which entities that you have, et cetera, that's respected, as well as you can have the offline profiles to say which data should be synchronized, what's the cadence, et cetera. So I think this ability to kind of have a true offline, crucial. This is actually one of the key underpinnings as we look at clients who want to do not just sales, but also field service and other processes. The ability to have the relevant data offline and being able to work on that fully offline is something that's a big deal for us. The next one, which, how many of you know that we have a gamification service? Okay, still the same 3 or 4 hands. So this is one more thing that I think is a good, well-kept secret, which is something that's available for all of our customers. It's a part of Dynamics 365 Plan 1. So, something for you guys to look at in order to kind of increase and turn on adoption. So I think the demo is very effective. I think a few key things that I kind of wanted to drive. I think it's team-based competition. It's not individual competition, so very different from a typical sales cycle, because sales cycle typically means, the sales competition typically means that the same guys usually tend to win the best prizes because they always have the best accounts. They're the most kind of aggressive sellers. But here you can essentially have a team-based selling. You can bring in multiple functions. So much more effective at kind of getting people interested in doing what they're doing, whether that's sales ops, whether that's sales. You can, of course, make it more visible, project this stuff onto a TV. We'll actually show you a little bit of that. And it's integrated with Dynamics 365, so which means that everything that you kind of do points on and analytics on is actually based on, could be based on activities in Dynamics 365. So I think that's the advantage. It's single sign-on enabled, so it's a service on Azure with AAD integration. So let's just quickly jump and do a demo of the gamification as well, please.
All right, so gamification platforms have been around. We know some of the benefits. For one, it promotes healthy team-based competition. It makes visible the results and the recognition for those results, which is super important, but also increases adoption of business tools. So once we introduce a new business tool, it requires a change of mindset. Putting a gamification platform on top might incentivize people to start using it a little bit more. But there are some pitfalls with traditional gamification tools. One is that top people will always win, right? The top performers, they are going to continue to be top performers. They are going to continue bringing a lot of revenue. And they never needed an incentive to continue to perform better anyway. They already had all the incentives that they needed. The other thing is that once people fall behind, it's very, very, very difficult to bring yourself back up. But such is life. People take vacations, they take sick leaves. 2 weeks that I'm out, I'm not getting points, and it's very hard for me to bring myself up. Now, the gamification solution for Dynamics 365 addresses most of those problems, and we're going to see how one of the best ways to see that is to actually go ahead and set up a game. So I'm going to set up a new game here and call it my game. And right off the bat, you can see that we have a number of different sports. These sports do not change the rules of the game, but they change kind of the theme around it. So it's going to be resonate much better with certain groups that might prefer a different sport. I know I'm Brazilian myself. If I offer American football in Brazil, they're not going to resonate as well as if I offered soccer. So there are a couple of different attributes here when the game is going to start. These are not important, so let's just move forward. The next thing I'm going to do is set up the KPIs. So these are the things that people are going to be measured against, the things are going to be measured against. So these KPIs are data that comes directly from Dynamics. And we have some KPIs that are set up out of box, the most used ones. But if you have certain entities and certain attributes on Dynamics that you want to track, you can also create your custom KPIs as well. Let's just to simplify things, let's just use the ones that are out of box here. So this is a sales organization. I'm going to say revenue 1 is one important thing that I want to track. And every time that people sell, say, $10,000, I'm going to give everyone 1 point. And not everyone, but the person who sold it. And every time, let's say that this is a company that makes lots of calls. They have to weekly call their accountant and ask, hey, do you have the supplies you need? Are you all set up to be done for this week? So making calls is important. Let's say that we also track calls made. So every time 1 call is made or 10 calls are made, I'm going to assign 1 point. Right, so these are my KPIs. Next thing that I have is set up the positions. And this is very important because this is where the fantasy league aspect comes in. So let me just go ahead and set up 2. One, I'm going to go ahead and say that it's these 4 people here. They happen to be our top performers. They're all going to play on the same position. These other 4 here, say that they are our new employees. Now, what's interesting is that every time this game starts, everyone is going to have to draft their teams. This is how fantasy sports work. But I set it up in a way that all the teams are always going to be balanced. You're not going to be able to have 2 quarterbacks. You're going to have to work with 1 top performer, and everyone is also going to have the same handicap. Everyone's also going to have a new employee. Now, if I'm a top performer, think about it. I'm going to go to that new employee and help them succeed because it's in my best interest to see my team thrive. So they're going to come to me and they're going to sit with me 24/7, and I'm going to teach them all the tricks on the book because it's important that I have that little advantage. I'm going to go ahead and move forward a little bit. We can also set up fans, so people who are not playing but would like to follow the game. Maybe they are on the sidelines, maybe they are on the back office. And the last thing, this is the fun part or the expensive part, depends on who you're talking to. But we're going to set up the awards. So you can set up awards for different aspects. One of those is the team that makes most points. So maybe let's say that they get a trip to Orlando, and second place is going to get an Xbox. Third place may get, I don't know, pat in the back, something. The Gold MVP award is the award that the top performer, the absolute top performer, is going to get. So the top performer continues to get their incentive, the incentive that they used to be getting before. But I also have this interesting thing, position awards. So maybe the position number 1, the number 1 place is going to get dinner with the CEO. And everyone who's number 1 at their position, so the new employees versus the top performers, they're going to get this prize. And think about, for the new employee, what a great opportunity to meet the company. And now they have a huge incentive to perform well as well, even though they are making perhaps 1% of the revenue that the others are making. I also have awards for specific KPIs. I'm going to go ahead and start the game. And as I start the game, I want to follow the game through the leaderboard. So here I'm going to see everyone, the teams that are performing the better and who is overall the best one. So in this case, Cole here. I can also see the awards and badges and a couple of different gamification elements. The other very cool thing is the Stream TV. So we've seen a couple of different organizations using that. Usually what they do is they buy this big screen TV and they put it in the middle of their floor, sales department, or As soon as people enter the company through the employee's entrance, they see this leaderboard, and it's just cycling, showing the different positions and what people are doing. And the last thing is that I also have some chatting capabilities, so I can go here on Smack Talk. And I can add some, have a conversation that everyone is going to see so everyone can follow. One of the cool things is that I can also add a special kind of message, which is called a ban. And say that I'm the CEO and we just closed the largest account in the company's history. I'm going to add this message with some animation to say congratulations, everyone, right? And I send this, and this message fires everyone up. It has a little bit of animation, maybe I should, and it's also going to show here on the Stream TV eventually. But the best way is just to kind of play here. So this is how it's going to play out, and it's going to appear in the Stream TV, gets everyone fired up, and everyone gets super proud that their company was able to close a big deal.
Thanks a lot, Carlos. So just a couple of use cases that I just wanted to highlight. I think lots of, more than 1,000 plus customers since we've launched the service, running at least 2 to 3 games. But I think just a few things that I wanted to call out. I think just metrics that perhaps for you to watch out for. I think SCI was nice, so they actually did a true test, right? They had some people using the gamification or fantasy sales team and some not using it. I think the key things, couple of key things, like the fact that your daily logins to kind of CRM or your tool increased by about 28-30%, so kind of driving up the MAU a little bit or the usage, and the number of tasks that people entered, because now you're actually going to get points based on the tasks that you entered. That increased about 134%. There are other business benefits as well as a consequence, right? If people are more in the system, they're actually logging things better, and they're essentially following the best practice business process. There should be some better sales as well. But it essentially drives kind of behaviors that go and help the tool be used more. Eon Chemicals, I think this one was actually driven by, it was essentially one of those where the CRM buy was contingent on gamification. We've seen a couple of those really large deals. And really for them, it was about driving new business. They wanted the sales guys and the new sales guys to be super excited. So a couple of just a quick kind of examples. A couple of things I think we're running towards the end of time. Just wanted to kind of highlight and close out the story in terms of the analytics and the reporting story. A lot of rich analytics that we provided, both traditional simple Power BI as well as for large enterprises, which a lot of you might be parts of, the ability to essentially synchronize all of the data in Dynamics 365 into a data warehouse where you can do Power BI and other type of reporting. So we provide both of those options, so quick and easy reporting as well as much richer reporting. And if you truly have big data, like take the bank, take the financial services bank, take retail type scenarios, we also have the customer insights for getting the right customer 360 and driving kind of this big data view of the customer, on which we've also built things like predictive lead scoring. This is actually available in preview. So the ability to use kind of CRM signals as well as signals that you bring from external systems, including LinkedIn, to be able to kind of drive predictive lead scores. That's something that's available as a part of the customer insights. I just don't want to go through every one of them, but I think just so that you know the type of customers who we're speaking about, 56,000 seats with an Aflac, or 25,000 seats with an HP, or 36K with Best Buy. And some of you might be from these, so we can definitely have the conversation. But just to give you a sense of the types of people who are picking it up. Another key message that I wanted to leave with you is that in several of these deals, we actually had IT choose the other vendor while the business came and picked Microsoft. So that's a good thing for those of you in the IT departments. What that means is your business teams are actually picking Microsoft. Several examples and good kind of best practices that we've seen in this is our sales team engages with your sales team, our business teams engage with that. So if you're having any problems around increasing the adoption of your product or having to kind of drive drive kind of business in new divisions, we have many sales teams and sales teams to help with that. So I think that's the key takeaway I wanted to kind of leave you with. Some large implementations, I think we've spoken about these ones. Did you want to kind of have any summary quickly? I know we're a little out of time, but was there a summary from your side?
Yeah, I'll just kind of, I don't even, well, you can leave it. Voice? So obviously it's as a marketer, it's really exciting. I had that set up at the beginning talking about how the buyer is driving modern sales. And when you have a product team delivering a solution like we have, it makes our job really easy, and hopefully it's going to make your job really easy as well. Because when you look at what Forrester is saying, that the activities of the modern B2B seller need to be, where did you put the clicker? It aligns very, very closely with this concept of what we were saying about relationship selling. It's taking the actual insights from Versium, from InsideView, from LinkedIn, from customer insights, et cetera, across the organization, and really making it actionable for the seller in the vehicle they choose to work with, whether it be Outlook, whether it be CRM in the web, CRM on the mobile client, or in LinkedIn. And most importantly, it's having a system then that can be really extended from the time that they onboard with learning path and intelligent business process and guided sales processes all the way through to the gamification and motivation, even to the most seasoned sellers. I'm going to skip to this one here because I highlighted it earlier, and I kind of showcased this Forrester report and how they kind of put a new stake in the ground. This was pretty transformational, and it was pretty controversial, still is controversial out there in the market. But it's important for you to understand their position and their take on it, in that they're no longer looking at Salesforce automation as sales management. It's about seller empowerment. And when they look at Microsoft in that top right corner, they're talking about intelligent seller productivity. They're talking about mature AI and machine learning, and they're talking about the potential that LinkedIn is going to bring. So we are in a very good spot in terms of market position. We bring together data productivity and CRM or business applications like no other organization out there, and we're very excited at what we have and make available to our customers to be able to drive their business. So thank you.